The morning sun cast long shadows across Parkview Market's worn linoleum floor. Located on the corner of Maple and Fifth in downtown Los Angeles, the small grocery store had served the neighborhood for over 4 decades. Its faded sign and slightly outdated interior stood in stark contrast to the gentrifying businesses sprouting up around it. Margaret Wilson, 78, carefully counted out her coins at the counter. Her arthritic fingers moved slowly but methodically, arranging quarters, dimes, and nickels into neat piles. She wore a simple floral dress that had seen better days, paired with a light cardigan despite the summer heat. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her humble appearance, there was a quiet dignity about her. "That's $3.75 so far," she murmured, more to herself than to the cashier standing impatiently before her. Behind the register stood Derek Lawson, a 24-year-old assistant manager with ambitions far beyond his current position. He wore his store-issued blue vest with visible reluctance, as though the polyester blend might somehow contaminate his designer jeans and carefully distressed t-shirt. His carefully styled hair and expensive watch seemed out of place in the modest market. The line behind Margaret had grown to 4 people. Most waited patiently, absorbed in their phones or simply gazing around the store. At the very end of the line stood a man in his late 50s, dressed in a well-worn black t-shirt, faded jeans, and boots. His long dark hair was slightly unkempt, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his face. He carried only a bottle of water and a protein bar, watching the scene unfold with quiet interest. Derek drummed his fingers on the counter as Margaret continued counting. "Ma'am, there are people waiting," he said, his tone clipped. "Almost finished, dear," Margaret replied, unruffled. "Just need to count out the last $1.25. Derek's sigh was theatrical. "We do accept bills, or credit cards. Welcome to the 21st century. A flicker of hurt crossed Margaret's face, but she continued counting. "I like to use my coins. Saves them from piling up at home." "Yeah, well, now they're piling up here instead," Derek muttered, just loud enough for the first few people in line to hear. A couple glanced down uncomfortably, while the man at the end of the line tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes. As Margaret finished counting out her coins, Derek made no move to help her. Instead, he watched as she pushed each pile toward him with trembling hands. $4.47, she announced with a small smile of accomplishment. Derek began scooping up the coins with visible distaste. "Your total is $4.95. You're still short." Margaret's smile faltered. "Oh dear, let me check my purse again." As she began rummaging through her handbag, Derek looked past her to the next customer. "I can help whoever's next while she's looking." "I'm not finished yet," Margaret protested gently. "Ma'am, you're holding up the line. If you can't pay, you'll need to put something back." Derek's voice had risen, drawing the attention of everyone in the vicinity. The elderly woman's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I know I have the rest somewhere." "Maybe next time bring actual money instead of pocket change," Derek said with a smirk. "Or better yet, shop at a time when we're not busy." A middle-aged woman in line cleared her throat disapprovingly, but Derek ignored her. Margaret finally produced 2 more quarters from the depths of her purse. "Here we are. That should cover it." Derek took the coins between his thumb and forefinger, as though they were contaminated. "Great. Can we move on now?" He didn't wait for a response before tossing the coins into the register with unnecessary force. Margaret said quietly as she gathered her small paper bag of groceries, there was a time when people weren't in such a hurry, when kindness wasn't seen as a waste of time. "Yeah, well, welcome to 2025, Derek replied dismissively. "Some of us have places to be." As Margaret slowly collected her receipt, Derek gestured impatiently for the next customer to step forward. The elderly woman moved aside carefully, her shoulders slightly hunched. The man at the end of the line watched this exchange with a stillness that seemed to radiate throughout his body. His expression remained neutral, but there was an intensity in his gaze that suggested wheels turning behind those dark eyes. As the line moved forward, Derek's demeanor changed depending on the customer. He was cheerful with a young woman in fashionable clothes, efficient with a businessman in a hurry, and returned to barely concealed disdain when an older gentleman paid with carefully counted bills instead of a card. Margaret had taken a seat on a bench near the exit, apparently needing to rest before the walk home. She arranged her small bag on her lap and watched the store's activity with quiet interest, seemingly unaffected by her earlier treatment. Finally, the man in black reached the front of the line. He placed his water and protein bar on the counter without a word. "Find everything okay?" Derek asked, his customer service voice firmly in place as he scanned the items. "Yes." The man's voice was deep and measured. "That'll be $5 even." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of quarters, dimes, and nickels. He began placing them on the counter one by one, his movements deliberate. Derek's smile froze. "You're kidding, right?" The man continued counting coins. "No." "Come on, man. I just dealt with this." Derek gestured vaguely in Margaret's direction. The man looked up, his dark eyes meeting Derek's. "Is there a problem with my payment method?" There was something in his tone that made Derek hesitate. "It's just, we're busy." "I see two people behind me," the man observed, continuing to count coins. "And I believe legal tender is legal tender." Derek's face reddened. "Look, it's just inefficient, okay? We have card readers for a reason. Not everyone has that privilege," the man replied, his voice still calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. $3. "Whatever," Derek muttered, watching as the pile of coins grew. The door chimed as a group of teenage girls entered the market. They were laughing about something, but their conversation died abruptly as they looked toward the register. "Oh my God," one of them whispered, not quite quietly enough. "That's him." "No way," her friend responded, staring openly. Derek glanced at them in confusion, then back at the man counting coins. The man didn't look up or acknowledge the whispers that had begun to spread through the small store. $4, the man said, still focused on his task. A store employee stocking shelves nearby had frozen in place, a box of cereal suspended in his hands as he stared at the man at the register. Derek shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that something was happening that he didn't understand. "Do I know you or something?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The man looked up briefly. "I don't think so." $4.75, he continued, placing more coins on the counter. One of the teenage girls had pulled out her phone and was discreetly trying to take a photo. Another had approached Margaret on the bench and was whispering excitedly to her, pointing subtly toward the register. Margaret's eyes widened in recognition, and a small smile spread across her face as she looked at the man counting coins. $5, the man announced, placing a final quarter on the counter. He looked up at Derek, his expression unreadable. Derek, now thoroughly confused by the store's strange atmosphere, began scooping the coins into the register. As he did, one of his coworkers approached the counter, wide-eyed. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I'm such a huge fan. Would it be okay if—" Derek's head snapped up. "Mr. Who?" The woman looked at him in disbelief. "Keanu Reeves? The actor?" Derek froze, coins clutched in his hand, as realization dawned. He stared at the man before him, really seeing him for the first time. The distinctive features, the familiar intensity in his eyes, features that had graced countless movie posters and magazine covers. "Oh," was all Derek could manage. Keanu accepted his receipt with a nod. "Thank you." Instead of immediately leaving, he turned and walked over to where Margaret sat on her bench. The store had grown oddly quiet, everyone pretending not to watch while doing exactly that. "Ma'am," Keanu said, offering a gentle smile, "may I help you with your groceries?" Margaret beamed up at him. "That's very kind, but I only live in the apartment building next door. I can manage." "I'm headed that direction anyway," he replied. "It would be my pleasure." Derek watched this exchange from behind the register. His earlier confidence evaporated. When Keanu and Margaret moved toward the exit, he found himself compelled to follow. "Mr. Reeves," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "I just wanted to say I'm a big fan." Keanu paused, turning to face the young cashier. His expression wasn't angry, merely thoughtful. "You know," he said after a moment, "we all have days when the world feels like it's moving too fast. When deadlines and pressures make us forget what really matters." Derek swallowed hard, acutely aware of everyone watching. "But at the end of the day," Keanu continued, "the way we treat each other is what defines us. Not how quickly we move through a line, not how we pay for things, not what we own. He gestured toward Margaret. This lady counted her coins because that's what works for her. Maybe it takes a little more time, but time is something we all have to give. Margaret smiled up at him gratefully. I paid with coins because sometimes we need to be reminded of that, Keanu added. We're all just people trying to get through our days with dignity. Derek's face had turned crimson. I'm sorry, he mumbled. To both of you, I was out of line. Keanu nodded. Apology accepted. I'm sure Margaret feels the same way. Of course, dear, Margaret said, patting Derek's arm. We all have our moments. As Keanu held the door open for Margaret, he turned back to Derek one last time. Remember, being kind is more important than being right, and it's definitely more important than being fast. With that, he escorted Margaret out into the sunlight, carrying her small bag of groceries. The story of what happened at Parkview Market spread quickly through the neighborhood. By evening, social media was buzzing with accounts, some accurate, some exaggerated, of how Keanu Reeves had stood up for an elderly woman being mistreated by a cashier. Derek found himself the subject of unwanted attention. Some customers came in specifically to glare at him. Others seemed to take pleasure in paying with exact change, watching his reaction carefully. His manager had called him in for a serious conversation about customer service. But something unexpected was happening to Derek as well. The encounter had shaken him more than he cared to admit. He found himself thinking about Keanu's words, turning them over in his mind during quiet moments. About dignity, about kindness, about what really defines a person. 3 days after the incident, Derek was working the morning shift when Margaret Wilson came in again. He felt his stomach tighten with shame as she approached his register with her small basket of items. Good morning, Margaret, he said, using her name for the first time. She looked surprised but pleased. Good morning, young man. As she began to reach for her coin purse, Derek shook his head gently. Take your time, there's no rush today. Margaret smiled at him. Thank you, dear. As she counted her coins, Derek helped her, grouping them into dollar amounts. When she came up short by 35 cents, he quietly added the difference from his own pocket. Our little secret, he said with a genuine smile. After Margaret left, Derek noticed a figure watching from the beverage aisle, a man in a black jacket with familiar dark eyes. Keanu nodded once in approval before slipping out the door, unseen by anyone else. That evening, Derek did something he'd been putting off for months. He called his grandmother, who lived alone in a retirement community 2 states away. They talked for over an hour. Parkview Market had undergone subtle changes. A new bench had been installed near the checkout area, specifically for elderly customers who needed to rest. A sign at each register read, "We gladly accept all forms of payment, including coins. Thank you for your patience as we count together." Derek still worked there, but he had changed too. His designer clothes had been replaced with more practical attire, and he had started a community outreach program that helped seniors with grocery delivery. Every Sunday, he personally delivered orders to the apartment building next door, always stopping to chat with Margaret Wilson and the friends she'd introduced him to. The story of Keanu's visit had become neighborhood legend, embellished with each retelling until it barely resembled what actually happened. Derek never corrected these exaggerations. The truth, the moment he had looked into Keanu Reeves' eyes and seen himself clearly for the first time, was something he kept private. What mattered wasn't the celebrity encounter, but the lesson he'd learned about patience, about dignity, and about seeing the humanity in every person who stood before him, coins in hand, just trying to get through their day. As for Keanu Reeves, he never returned to Parkview Market, at least not that anyone recognized. But sometimes new customers would come in, pay with exact change, and leave without their receipt. And Derek would wonder if perhaps the lesson continued to spread in ways he couldn't see, carried forward by a man who understood that small acts of kindness were more powerful than grand gestures, and that true wealth had nothing to do with how you paid for a bottle of water and a protein bar. The end.